Welcome to Just Break Up, the podcast about love, heartbreak, and all the relationship advice you don't want to hear. My name is Sierra DeMulder.
And I'm Sam Blackwell. And today we're going to answer a letter from somebody who feels like she left a friend hanging for 3 years. But before we begin, we just want to give you our Surgeon General's warning, which is that Sierra and I are not licensed mental health practitioners.
No, we are not professionals. We are not trained in any of this. So please take our advice as you see fit. We're only here to offer our humble musings to hopefully shed some understanding and maybe some laughs about the incredibly rewarding but mostly confusing experience that is love and friendship. Okay, so today's letter is coming to us from Guilty Ghoster, whose pronouns are she, her, who is writing to us from a bottomless pit of shame. Dear Sierra, I know, spicy.
That sounds terrible.
No, not spicy. Sticky, like muddy. Yeah. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Oh.
Okay. Dear Sam, Sierra, and Spencer, I've been thinking about writing for a long time. I'm 24, but this story starts way back when it was 2018. Right after I graduated high school, I left my home country to work as a live-in nanny for a wonderful host family. There, I met the person who would become my best friend for the next several years. Let's call her Nora. Nora was also working as a live-in nanny at the time, and we became fast friends. We spent nearly every day together and went on countless adventures. I felt entirely sure that we would be in each other's lives forever. We talked about being maids of honor at each other's weddings and godmothers to each other's kids one day. We often joked that if neither of us found a partner, eventually we would just get married platonically, buy a house, and adopt together. When it was time for me to go back to my home country to begin university, Nora stayed in the same city we had met in. Even when our friendship became long distance, it remained strong as ever. We texted each other every single day and called each other regularly. When the pandemic hit in 2020 and lockdown began, it became clear that our political views differed greatly. I was very concerned about COVID and was a big believer in masking up, social distancing, etc. Nora was on the total opposite end of the spectrum, claiming that the mask mandates and the lockdowns were ridiculous. At first, we didn't let our differences and opinions impact our friendship. We agreed to just steer clear of the topic and understand that it was okay that we both had different perspectives. In the summer of 2021, after lockdown measures were lifted and I had been fully vaccinated, I traveled back to the city where we had met to visit my former host family and Nora for a week. I was staying at my former host family's house, and they told me they still needed to be cautious of COVID due to some health issues. They very kindly and respectfully asked that while I stayed in their home to please refrain from spending unmasked time indoors with anyone who was not fully vaccinated yet. Since Nora had chosen not to receive her vaccines, I let her know that while I was really looking forward to seeing her again after so long, we would need to only spend time together outdoors with us both wearing masks due to my host family's wishes. Nora became very upset by my request. She said that she felt attacked and like she wasn't being welcomed by my host family or I due to our political beliefs. I tried my best to reassure her that I completely respected her decision not to be vaccinated and that it was her body and her choice. I tried so hard to explain that I was still so excited to see her and that I really wanted to spend time with her, but that in order to be respectful to my host family, I had to be respectful of their wishes, especially because I was a guest in their home. We eventually fell into a cycle of arguing back and forth over text over our opposing viewpoints. Somehow, the conversation devolved into us both trying to state our case for why we were either for or against COVID vaccinations. At one point during the conversation, Nora began to tell me about the articles she had read about people who supposedly dropped dead at the day they received the vaccine, and I just couldn't do it anymore. We were just going round and round in circles, and I felt so exhausted by our argument. I sent her a text saying that I felt very hurt and unheard and that I needed to take some time to cool down before speaking with her again. Nora never responded to that last text. I truly had every intention of reaching back out to try to resolve our argument. I really, really did. I guess I just never could find the right words. I didn't know what to say to fix what had been broken in our friendship. I kept meaning to sit down and write her out a long message, but I was so incredibly busy between work, school, and a new relationship that I just could never find the time. I think part of me, maybe an immature part, was still hoping that she would text me first. Before I knew it, months slipped by. Then a year had gone, then 2, then 3. It's been almost 3 years since the last time we spoke. In those last 3 years, life has moved incredibly fast. I've thought of Nora from time to time, sometimes reminiscing about our happy memories or wishing that our arguments had gone differently. But usually, the thought of her and our friendship only sticks in my brain for a few moments or so. For some reason, last week, a memory of her popped into my head, and I have not been able to stop thinking about her since. I've gone on a deep dive in my mind, replaying everything that happened during our argument. I've realized that I never really properly grieved the friendship that meant so much to me. I feel so incredibly ashamed and guilty for the way that I basically just ghosted her. I feel like a gigantic asshole. I should have made it a priority to follow up on that conversation and do my best to resolve our argument. But instead, I just left her hanging. She must have felt so hurt and rejected by this. I still stand by my choice to respect my host family's wishes, but if I had known then what I know now, I would have approached the situation with more empathy and understanding. I would have followed through on our conversation and not just left it hanging the way I did. I feel like I'm spiraling into an abyss of guilt and don't quite know what to do with all these feelings. Should I reach out to her and apologize for ghosting her the way that I did? Should I let her know that I'm so sorry for not being more empathetic and understanding? I just want her to know that I think of her often, and even though I don't necessarily see a future for our friendship, the memories we made together during those years are still so close to my heart. But would it be selfish for me to reach out to her now just because I'm feeling guilty? Would it ultimately do her more harm than good? And what in the world would I even say? It just feels like a text message after 3 years would be too little, too late. I would be so grateful for any of your humble musings and words of wisdom. I apologize for the incredibly long letter. Thank you sincerely for all the beautiful work you do. Eternally grateful, Guilty Ghoster.
All right, Guilty Ghoster, thank you so much for writing to us about this. I'm sorry that you're feeling so much guilt about this. I think it's important to recognize the fact that these types of things happen, right? We often think of ghosting as being like an intentional sort of like malicious thing. And also sometimes ghosting happens because we're hurt and we don't exactly know what to say. And we think we're going to get around to it at some point, and then we don't, because the conversation just isn't something that we feel capable of having, or we don't have the time, or we don't want to have to parse through all of the different feelings and emotions that have come up for us around whatever conversation it was that sort of led us to not wanting to talk to this person for a while. And I want to say that out loud because I want to offer you a lot of empathy and understanding around how this situation turned from one fight at one day into 3 years of no contact. I think that there are people in my life who I have had big fallouts with after a big fight, and that just like we never got back to the same place, either through not communicating at all or figuring out how to be in each other's lives in a really sort of surface level way. I think that there's lots of different reasons why folks make the decisions that they do. And I also want to just offer to you that it takes two to tango in this situation. She also hasn't reached out to you. So I want to alleviate you of some of the guilt and blame in this. And I want to also just like name for other folks who may have some feelings about people who ghost, to recognize the humanity that's behind that ghost, and that sometimes this is what happens for folks in relationship with each other. We're going to offer some other thoughts and sort of ways to find empathy for yourself, given everything that's happened in the situation. And we're going to answer your question of whether or not you should reach out to Nora. But before we do that, we are going to take a quick break.
All right, my darlings, welcome back. Yes, to everything Sam said. I think we want to start quickly by just like affirming what a wild time the last 4 years have been.
100%.
And I think it's actually important to name that because I think we just sort of expected ourselves to be able to move through life and circumstances and relationships with the same tools and grace that we could access normally. But those years were not normal, and we couldn't we didn't have the same tools, and we were all stressed, and we were being fed tons of information from every different angle you could ever want. Any opinion you had, you could Google it and find people shouting about it. You know what I mean? Any fear you had, you could Google it and you could find people affirming that fear. And it was a weird time.
And I think like many of us forget how terrible and awful things were because that's what our bodies do when trauma happens.
Childbirth.
Yeah, absolutely. We just like shut it down and we're like, nope, that didn't happen. That's why so many of us describe those years as being kind of lost or like a blur. Like we don't remember parts of it, right? Because things were so bad there. And even in this moment, you know, you this summer of 2021, folks had started getting vaccinations, right? Like people were still dying daily, right? From COVID. And it, you know, people didn't have built up immunity, right? We didn't have the treatment for it that we have now, right? There were so many other things that were like, even with vaccinations, people were still dying and, you know, navigating those tricky situations around how do I have these conversations with people about what our boundaries are around masking, not masking, being indoors, not being indoors, right? Like Sierra and I received hundreds of letters about people trying to figure out how to navigate different points of view about what we shouldn't be doing around vaccinations, masking, indoors, outdoors, how big of a party it should be, right? Like, how often you should be testing, right? Like this was all up in the air. It was all really confusing. And people in the healthiest, best, most beautiful relationships were trying to figure out how to navigate this with each other, with their friends, with their family. And like, that's the moment that this fight happened in, right? It didn't happen now in 2024 where we can maybe hold more empathy or understanding for these differences in opinion, right? We were happening at this point where it was like the political decisions that folks were making were about life and death, right? Like it wasn't just like, oh, are you going to wear a mask the next time you're on an airplane or not, right? Like this was like, oh, if I don't wear a mask, I might kill my employer's, you know, immunocompromised daughter, right? Like this was so the moment stressful that we were at. It was terrible and stressful. And so the idea that you had some trouble offering empathy to this person who was yelling at you because you asked her to wear a mask and sit outside is like understandable. Even now in 2024, I would have difficulty offering empathy to somebody who's telling me that they don't want to respect the wishes that I have around my health or the health of the people around me, right? Like I think it's pretty reasonable that you were upset about this and that you got into an argument about it, because who wouldn't? I would have. I would have. Like, I'm telling you right now, in the exact same situation, and I probably would have handled it worse than you. I'm just going to say that out loud. Like, I don't think that I would have been able to like say, hey, I need to cool off. I think I just would have stopped talking to that person. Like, I just want to remember, I want us to remember how terrible things were during that time, because I want us to put this particular argument in the proper context of what was happening at that moment.
I totally agree. It was so fraught. It was stressful. It was social, you know, like it was not only people were dying, and it was all happening so fast. Even a couple of years in, it still felt like everything was still so new. But also, our relationships were being so challenged. And like Sam said, this all makes sense. Like, this doesn't tell me anything about you as a person who is able to have friends. Do you know what I mean? Like, this doesn't tell me you're a bad friend. And now that we've just like affirmed what a strange time that was and a challenging time that was, and like, of course you weren't working with, of course this happened is what I'm trying to say. This happened all over the world. It doesn't tell me anything about what terrible friends you are. And then you say, but wait, Sierra, I ghosted her for 3 years. And I want to say to you, this is actually why I wanted to answer this letter. I resonated so strongly with your paragraph where you said, like, I had every intention of reaching back out. And then I just ... didn't. And I want to say that that happens in life. Life moves so fast. It pulls us into a million different directions. And even the best intentions, even with the best intentions, we don't always follow through in the way that we want to, especially when we feel hurt, confused, frustrated, and most importantly, I think in this situation, really exhausted. You didn't have the bandwidth, you didn't have the energy to return to this in a way that felt sufficient. And you know what? I'm sure there's people out there that are like, you owe her something else. And I'll speak to myself because I have done this. I have not spoken to somebody and I've gone years, right? And I want to say like, yeah, you're right. I could have reached out sooner. I could have said something else. And also I didn't. This is part of life. You know, when we say not all people are for us, it's not just like not everybody is meant to date me or whatever. It's saying like we have such a busy, connected life, right? We are only human. We are getting pulled in so many different directions. And even on the days that we aren't busy, even on the days where we do have time to write that email, I just don't expect us to be able to do that all the time. Maybe that makes me a huge asshole. Maybe that makes me think that people are inherently assholes. And maybe we are. But like this quote, ghosting of your friend, doesn't tell me anything about you and your ability to be a good friend. This is a part of life. The internet and the level of connectivity that we have now makes us feel like constant contact is the only way to maintain, it's the only way to be a good person, not just to maintain friendships. I don't know. It makes sense to me that time slipped like that. Time will do that again and again. I don't want you to do something that I often do, which is I let nostalgia, blur out all the sharp things. And so that I only remember the good things. And that's what makes me feel like an asshole. That's what makes me feel like, I read it in your letter. You say, oh, I'm so bad. I must have made her feel so terrible. I think she probably felt very similarly to you, like hurt, but tired. And then her life went on. And then she probably thinks of you every once in a while. I don't know how she carries you, but, Sam always does a good job of like reminding us that like people are often not thinking about us the way that we think that they're thinking about us. I don't want you to use nostalgia as a way to only feel blame for yourself. It sounds like your relationship was under an intense amount of stress and you were both approaching it from your own corners, and she was being really frustrating and she was very frustrated by you. And it makes sense that neither of you had the bandwidth or the maturity, whatever you want to call it. But for me, it seems like a sense of tiredness. Like it makes sense that both of you didn't have the bandwidth to return to it until now, right? We also always say that like when you go through something traumatic, you can't always like deal with it. You can't always deal with it until you feel safe or ready. And like, sure, could you have sent an email or a text message a dozen times over the last 3 years? Yeah, but you didn't because somewhere in you weren't ready. You weren't ready to prioritize it. And now you maybe are. And we can talk about whether or not we think you should reach out, but I just want you to know like how much I relate to that. And I think a lot of people will understand, and we all feel bad about it, but also like that is the way time and life moves sometimes. I feel like my advice today is like, it's just be that way. Like people are just like that, but it also is. We also are that,
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I also I want to not lose sight of the reality that this also isn't necessarily like a both people were in the wrong situation. I totally understand the idea that maybe the argument got the better of you, but I also I want to acknowledge the hurt that she caused to you when you asked her a very reasonable thing, right? Which is to wear a mask and be outdoors, right? That wasn't you imposing political views on her. That wasn't you like forcing her to do something that was ethically against her values, right? Like that was you just asking for what you needed given the circumstance that you were in. And she said no, and then made it seem like you were being awful to her, right? And I want to like, because I really want to make sure that we're not just like doing like a both sides-ism here, right? Like they were wrong on both sides, right? Like what you were asking for was reasonable. And the way that she responded was to attack you and say that you were causing her harm, which is not true. Like that's not what happened. And so like, I totally understand that like maybe the way that you handled this or the words that you used were really frustrating for you, but I don't want to lose sight of the ways in which she caused you harm and harmed herself by reacting in the way that she did to something that is really reasonable. Because yes, I want to hold empathy for this person and totally understand where she is coming from. And also the way that she was behaving was not acceptable, right? Like it wasn't okay that she did this to you. And I want to hold that because again, like I know you feel this guilt for not talking to her for 3 years, but I also want to say like she hurt you. Like she caused harm to you. You asked her to do something and then she tried to make it seem like you were like, I don't know, suppressing her political will or something, right? Like there's like, there is somebody who is more at fault in this situation. I will tell you that. And it's reasonable to me that you didn't feel safe engaging with this person because you asked for a reasonable thing and she blew up at you, right? Like I wouldn't want to have that conversation either. I wouldn't want to engage with somebody who's hurt me. I've had these types of conversations
especially
where I ask for a reasonable thing. Yeah. And
Yes.
they have gone ballistic on me. And I'm like, okay, so now I can't ask for a thing. Like I don't want to be in a relationship where I can't ask for a thing. And I don't feel comfortable talking to you about this thing because in the past, what's happened is that I've tried to talk to you about this and you've gone ballistic on me. Right. So like, I think that it's important to recognize that because it offers the proper context for why you haven't felt okay to talk with this person for the last 3 years. And I know that like nostalgia can bring up all sorts of like, things were so beautiful and I fucked things up. But like nostalgia also lies to us, right? And I want to look at this and say, I don't know that this person is going to handle you reaching out well to her, given the way that she responded to you asking for her to accommodate your needs in that moment, you know, like but I'm also, you know, I'm a type 5 on the Enneagram. So like, I'm like, well, withdrawal, you know? So I'm like, I wouldn't want to talk to this person again. Like no matter, I would want to hold in my heart empathy for them. I would want to wish them well from a distance. I would want to say like, oh, I wish that our relationship could have gone better than it did, right? Like I will always look back on them fondly and maybe I would write a journal entry about this or talk to a friend about this, but I wouldn't approach this person again, given the way that things blew up during that conversation, right? Like it wouldn't feel safe for me. It wouldn't feel like it would be worth it for me to re-engage with somebody who yelled at me, right? Or who discredited my needs so deeply, or who played themselves as a victim of something that wasn't actually happening, right? Like I would have trouble with that. And I would not want to reach out to that person because for me, it would be more important for me to preserve my peace than it would be for me to try and reopen something with someone who has a track record of blowing up at me when I try and approach them with consideration.
I think this is a perfect time for the differences in our personality, not because I think the friend showed a level of dysregulation and lack of care. You know what I mean? Like it's just a simple thing. It's just literally one thing. So I agree with you, meaning that there was somebody who was more at fault here. I also think that I think that there's a world in which it might make our letter writer feel better. Well, not feel better in like an appeasing way, but like, I think there's a world in which you can reach out and the friend, Nora, might feel some remorse because years have passed and that was a really stressful time. And maybe she has gone deeper into those feelings of I don't know, her weird political values being threatened or whatever.
Sure.
Or maybe she's recognizing there's more nuance to the world than that. And I would send the letter, I think, but I would send it knowing that there's probably not a place for this friendship in your current life. I would send it because that's just who I am in my DNA. And I would say something like, hey, I've thought of you many times over the years, and I hope that you're doing well. Even though the way that our friendship ended was disappointing, I value the time that we had together. I regret not reaching out sooner. I'm not interested in rehashing anything, like you probably aren't either, but I just wanted you to know, I wanted to do something with my thoughts for a change instead of just letting them pass. I hope you're doing well. I understand the argument in which that is opening up a can of worms, opening yourself up to this person again, potentially re-hurting them because they're like, oh my God, fuck you for not talking to me this whole time. It is just in my DNA to be like, well, life is short, and I want them to know that I regret ending it the way that I did. You don't have to rehash things if you can shut down the conversation if they want to start rehashing things. And I think that we talked in this week's check-in topic about turtling, right? And I see you pulling back here and saying like, this person is going to have this reaction again, even bigger, or this person lost their right to your life, right? And I don't see it as like letting them back into your life in that way. I see it as an action for the letter writer so that they can put this to bed in their heart. You know what I mean? So that they can say what they need to say to feel like to forgive themselves, to let themselves move on or whatever. However, I also know, like, you have taught me that we can do that on our own. There's no reason for the letter writer to send that. And also there is potential for connection here, even if that connection just means, hey, I've been thinking about you too. I hope that you're well. And then both of them can live with a little bit more peace. I think that's why I'm a proponent for that sort of communication in this style. But I also know that there are times in which it's unsafe, and that's when you're like, boom, I'm out or whatever.
For sure. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think you can do it. I think that there is absolutely some good reason to want to do it in that way. I just don't want you to like approach this person and just apologize for not talking to them for 3 years because
yes,
there's hurt
that is
here.
a great way to, yes.
You know what I mean? Like this person behaved badly towards you and then didn't talk to you for 3 years, right? I know that you were the one to send the last message, right? Where you were like, I need time. But also then they didn't talk to you. They didn't talk to you for 3 years.
Hey, how are you doing? Are you feeling better? Are you ready to talk? Yeah.
I'd love to talk to you about this, right? Like, that never happened either. So I want you to find closure for this. Absolutely. Whether that's reaching out to this person or doing this on your own. What I don't want for you to do is to try and find some way to apologize for something that wasn't your fault. I don't want you to lay yourself on the altar to allow this person to have any more power over you. Like, I want you to be able to express the hurt that you're feeling. I want you to be able to say, I know that I messed up too, but I'm afraid that what you're looking for is sacrificing yourself to give this person peace. And
I totally agree.
And they need to find their peace on their own, right? Just like you need to find your peace as well and heal from the harm that this person caused you and is continuing to cause you by not talking to you for 3 years.
Yes. And I think for me, it's also a lot about emotional maturity because for me, I'm literally looking at an email that I sent someone maybe a decade after we hadn't spoken. And we didn't speak because we hurt each other. And I continued I didn't reach out earlier because I finally said to myself, she hurt me. Like this was, and I finally was able to have the emotional bandwidth and the self-preservation to be like, I actually don't want to go crawling back to this friend and apologize for how I hurt them, because I realized that I was actually going to make space for the way that they hurt me, and recognize that I just didn't want to put energy into that life to that person anymore. And then I matured and I grew and I settled with all of those feelings. And then I sent an email that was just saying, for me, it was for my heart, because I was continually thinking about them. And I wanted to send them well from that place of maturity, from the place of maturity being like, hey, like, we're different people now. I'm not going to apologize. I literally, in this email, I'm looking at it, I didn't bring up anything in the past, just to be like, I think of you, and I'm curious of who you've grown into. You don't need to no need to respond in any particular way or at all, really. I just wanted to do something with these thoughts for a change. I wish you well. I hope you well. You know what I mean? And that was received really well, and it made me feel great. And now we don't talk again. But I wanted to add to this conversation, because you're bringing up such great points that, like, I think that there was a time in which I wanted to send the I'm sorry email, but then I like let myself actually feel my feelings and affirm my boundaries and my comfort and the ways in which she hurt me, and heal from them fully. And then I was able to genuinely send a hello email that was genuine and didn't need anything and didn't want to atone for anything other than to make that connection feel a little bit softer, you know?
Sure.
I know that's all insane. It's not insane.
We're
it's
just very different people.
We're
but
just
it's
such
great.
different people. I know. Anyway, yeah. So there's two different perspectives from two Geminis.
Of course.
Yeah. I think like mashing our two opinions together. I think maybe you should sit on these feelings for a little bit. You know,
Mm-hmm.
revisit them. Figure out how you feel about this person, and while validating your own wounds in this, you know, and then see, like, well, what do you want from them? What do you want from reaching out? Is it an apology? Is it a connection? Do you want them to know that you feel sorry? Like, I guess I'm curious about what would you want from a contact from them, you know?
For sure.
Because that will prevent you from sending an unnecessary I'm sorry email. And
Right.
I don't know. Yeah.
This is complicated, you know, like
Yeah.
so many things in life and relationships are, especially over the course of the last few years. But just to remember that your hurt gets to take up space in your relationships, right? Your hurt is worth tending to, whether that is by yourself or with people that you love or in reaching out to this person. And it's okay for you to do that hurt, that healing, that support, that love for yourself on your own. And it's also okay, like Sierra said, to find a way to make connection with this person.
Yeah.
As long as you're doing it from a place of your own closure, right? Your own sense of wanting to be in the world differently, and not from a place where you feel like you need to absolve some sort of sin for not talking to this person for the last few years.
There.
So
That's it.
we love you. We know that this is a tricky situation, and we hope that all of our musings and our discordant advice is helpful for you.
On brand. It's
Yeah.
true. We love you. We hope this helps. All right, pals, it's Friday, which means it is time for our blind date, which is something that we love, that we want to set you up with. And this week, our blind date is...
It is an episode, actually 2 episodes of a podcast that I think I've talked about on this show before or done a blind date for. It's Maintenance Phase, which is hosted by Michael Hobbs and Aubrey Gordon. And they talk about like the diet culture, sort of like healthcare field, sort of thinking about it in very sort of like fat positive ways, queer positive ways, trans positive ways. And they have 2 episodes that are out most recently, which is about the idea of rapid onset gender dysphoria, which is like sort of a right-wing idea about how trans kids are becoming trans because they're spending too much time on the internet. And it's just like a very interesting sort of glimpse into the way that people are talking about and thinking about trans kids. There's a lot of discrediting of the quote unquote research that folks have done around quote rapid onset gender dysphoria. And And I think in this particular moment, thinking about folks in my life who are experiencing understandings of themselves as trans or queer or whatever the thing is, that we continue to have conversations about how we can support trans kids in meaningful and compassionate ways, and how we can push back against ideas that somehow trans people don't exist, or they've become trans because the internet told them to, or because all of their friends are doing it, and instead think about how we can think about gender in an expansive and inclusive and loving way, and support young people especially, and also adults in their experiences of their bodies, of their gender, and of the ways that they want to express that gender. So check it out if you're interested. Again, it's called Maintenance Phase. The most two recent episodes are about rapid onset gender dysphoria, and they're both very good.
Awesome.
All right, everyone. Thank you so much for listening. If you would like more content from us, or if you would like access to our monthly office hours, you can support us on Patreon. If you support us on Patreon for as little as $5 a month, you'll get an additional bonus weekly episode, as well as access to those office hours. The next one is coming up on Sunday, July 28th. So sign up now so you can be part of that conversation. That's patreon.com/justbreakuppod.
You can slide into our DMs, send us your favorite relationship memes, but most importantly, you can submit your questions about all matters of the heart at justbreakuppod.com, which is also where you can find our merchandise.
Please remember to like, follow, subscribe, give us a 5-star rating and a review. This literally keeps our mics on and helps us reach more broken-hearted souls who need two random strangers giving them relationship advice.
Just Break Up is a production of Duvid Media, original music, recording, editing, producing, all magical things by our good friend Spencer Worth Davis. Make sure to check out his music and podcasts. And remember, sometimes the feelings that we are feeling aren't actually meant to be acted upon. They're meant to be explored, questioned, nurtured. You know, watching my feelings mature and heal gave me the perspective to move and act in a way that felt the most authentic to me. We don't always have to respond to those feelings. Sometimes we just need to listen. And if all else fails,
just break up.